Welcome, and thanks for listening to Cherry Bekaert's Government and Public Sector podcast series. In each episode, we hear from the best in the business on the latest challenges, trends, and opportunities affecting the government and public sector. I'm Christian Fjellgraf, leader of Cherry Bekaert's Government and Public Sector industry team. I hope you enjoy, and thank you for joining us.
Welcome, everyone, to Understanding Subrecipients, the who, the what, and the why. This is episode 1 of season 2 of our grants management podcast series. Paula, wow, we made it to season 2. I'm so excited for us. So, Paula, how is 2025 treating you so far?
Well, it's been a little chaotic, but everything's going great. We have a great forecast for the rest of the year with our podcast schedule, and I'm happy to be here with you for season 2.
Oh, thank you. Me too. It has been quite the whirlwind already. But we're going to forge ahead, and we're going to keep doing our podcast and pass out this great grants management advice for everyone who's listening. So I am Kat Kizior. I am the Grants Management Solutions Lead at Cherry Bekaert. I am also a certified grants management specialist, and I have over 25 years of experience in the grants and accounting field. How about you, Paula?
Ditto. I am a grant management solution lead as well, and I am also a certified grant management specialist with over 25 years in grants and accounting and local, nonprofit, and commercial. So lots of different sectors.
Yes. So today's podcast will focus on, like we said, subrecipients. What is a subrecipient? Who is considered a subrecipient? And why subrecipients can add value to your grants project. This discussion will be from the point of view of the grant recipient who would award or grant a subaward to another organization that is considered to be a subrecipient, either based on grant terms or as determined by the actual recipient or pass-through agency. So Paul and I do a lot of subrecipient work, from monitoring to writing subrecipient plans for agencies. So when it comes to subrecipient compliance, we are always on top of the latest regulations. So let's just start out with the basics. Paula, it seems logical to start a discussion with definitions of subrecipient and explaining the language in the uniform guidance on the differences in a subrecipient, a contractor, and a beneficiary.
All right, it makes sense to me. So let's dive right in. So what's always helpful for me when I'm listening to a podcast is to get a mental picture so that our listeners can visualize. So let's start at the very top. First, we have a federal agency. Let's say it's the Department of Education, and they put out a request for proposals, an RFP, they all call it. They're asking for proposals for innovative STEM programs, and they will directly fund the program. Typically, with the Department of Education, the funds would go through the state, but we're going to keep this example simple. So there's an enterprising nonprofit. Let's call them Active Learning, Inc., and they manage 15 charter schools across the country. And they put in a proposal and they get funded. Hooray! So we have the federal agency. Now they are the recipient of the award. They received it. They are an entity, according to 2 CFR 200, that receives a federal award directly from a federal agency to carry out an activity under a federal program. But the people who wrote the proposal are at headquarters. They're not scattered all across the country where the schools are. So they wrote the award so that they would make individual schools subrecipients, or according to 2 CFR 200's definition, entities that receive a subaward from a pass-through entity to carry out part of a federal award. So the funds are passing through the recipient, Active Learning, Inc., our management company, and they're heading to individual schools as subrecipient awards or subawards. These subawards are typically a contract, an agreement, or an MOU, a memorandum of understanding. It's a legally binding document. It shows the budget for the program with the costs, like the teachers, the classroom usage, the supplies and materials, and it shows the objectives for the program. Like in this example, by the end of the program, we will increase participant math skills by 2%. In this case, the subaward to the subrecipient is directly tied to the outcomes for the grant. And this is where this gets tricky. It's where a lot of the confusion stems from. So Active Learning Inc. also built some other work into their proposal for contractors. The classrooms that they need for the STEM program need to be updated to deliver the objectives. They need a technology makeover to make sure the robotics that they're going to purchase for the program communicate with their existing systems. So for each of the subrecipients, all 15 of them, they have a budget for a contractor to do the work. And according to 2 CFR 200, it's an entity that receives a contract to provide goods or service. So this is the tricky part. Even though the contractor's work is important for the program delivery, they're not directly tied to achieving the objectives of the award. They don't do any program reporting. They just do the work, submit an invoice, and get paid. So let's kind of go back and recycle all of that. The proposal was written and funded by the Department of Education to Active Learning as the recipient, who passed the funds to the individual schools to implement the program as subrecipients. These schools then hired contracts to prepare the learning space as contractors under a contract. So now it's time to launch the program and the students show up and they are the beneficiaries of the award. So they're the people who receive the direct services of the award. So Kat, what do you think? I think that paints a picture. And I think if that's clear enough, then we can get into the nitty gritty of these terms in practice.
Definitely. That is a great example. And as we walk through some of the other terms and the other activity, So as we walk through some of the other terminology and the actions that we are going to talk about here with subrecipients, keep that in mind and think about how these actual definitions, terms, actions relate to a subrecipient or a contractor. So if this is the first time you're hearing about subrecipients and contractors, or maybe it's the 10th time or the 100th time, it can still be difficult to figure out what terms to use when you are using grant money for a project. I mean, think of it this way. A subrecipient is doing work for you to benefit your grant objectives. Just like Paula said, a contractor is providing a good or service, but they are no way attached to the project. So how do you determine which one to use? You have to consider relationship and purpose. So I'm going to walk through subrecipients and contractors and things that you can actually look at within your program, what kind of services they're providing to kind of distinguish if you should be a subrecipient or if this should be a contractor. So first of all, look at programmatic decision making. A subrecipient has responsibility for making programmatic decisions, and they can exercise judgment and discretion when they carry out their work. They are attached to that project. The subrecipient's performance can be measured, and it will be measured, and they need to meet the objectives of that federal program. And the subrecipient also must adhere to applicable compliance requirements as they are considered an extension or a part of that project when the pass-through entity passed that federal funding through to them. Also, the subrecipient is using these funds to carry out a program for a public purpose. This is federal funding, so it's related to a public purpose, as opposed to just providing goods and services for a single fee. And the subrecipient is also at risk of non-compliance. So with federal program requirements, they're accountable. They have to ensure compliance just as a pass-through entity would. So when you're thinking about a subrecipient, should I say that I am giving a subaward to a subrecipient or paying a contractor? Think about those points. So let's go to the other side and talk about contractors. So what would you look at for a contractor? So the contractor is providing a good and service that's used for that federal project and for the operation of the federal program, but they're only providing a good and service. They are not involved. A contractor would operate a competitive environment. So you have to do an RFP or a bid to provide these similar goods and services. Whereas with a subrecipient, that's not the case. The contractor does not have any responsibility for program decision making at all. They do not have the ability to exercise discretion in the program's execution. And as we said with subrecipients, they definitely do. And a contractor would be subject to terms and conditions in the contract, but not actually the compliance requirements for that federal program. They are just going to have to follow the contract put together from the procurement. And also, contractors provide goods and services for a fee, typically at market prices, where subrecipients don't work that way, and then you have to negotiate, you talk with them and figure out the fees, and they're doing that program with you.
That was good. But I think here's the kicker, though, Kat. This one is always one that maybe concerns me and why we're having this podcast. Uniform guidance really leaves it up to the recipient to determine whether your funding is going to a contractor or a subrecipient. So it's up to the recipient to use their best judgment in determining which one to use.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. They leave it up to that recipient to make that decision. Another one of our great things about grants, and we talk about sometimes they just let us make our own decisions, and it's difficult to figure out exactly what we should do to be compliant, right? So if you have subrecipients or are currently in the process of granting subawards, which are the funds awarded to the subrecipient, you know that subrecipient monitoring is complex and time-consuming. If you have not done any work with subrecipients in the past, before you get into a subrecipient agreement with federal funding, make sure you read all of your terms and conditions. There's a lot involved with that. It takes time and staff. So why would anyone decide to label a fund recipient as a subrecipient and not as a contractor when you actually have that choice? It's up to you. I mean, it seems like a lot less on your plate if you're just paying a contractor, right? So what are the ramifications if you choose the wrong classification? Are there ramifications, Paula?
Absolutely. I want to tackle this one head on. So everybody listen up. There are definitely consequences for choosing incorrectly, or for what we would say taking the easy road based on the description you just gave. My advice is to start right from the beginning, even when writing the proposal, like Active Learning did, to make it clear what those relationships are. But beyond that, when the funder approves your budget and the budget narrative, they're approving how you told them you would spend the money. So it's very critical that you go back and look how you described that in the narrative. That said, here's what can happen if you classify a relationship as a contractor when it should have been a subrecipient. It's a bit of a list. Non-compliance. Right away, that's the big overarching problem you're going to have. Non-compliance with federal regulations. Then I think the next thing that can happen, or that non-compliance really shows up in audit findings and penalties. So this can lead to financial repercussions, having to return money, legal and administrative consequences. It definitely leads to reputational damage. You know, when you're being looked at, when you've put in a proposal, there's a requirement that the funding agency has to go and check you out and check your compliance history. And so your risk level from that assessment can be determined from these non-compliance issues and audit findings. And the worst thing that can happen, corrective action plans. They take a lot of time and energy to manage, implement, and make sure that you have rectified the problem that was observed. So let's go back to our example where we're providing STEM learning to our beneficiaries, our students. What it looks like at the program level is inadequate monitoring oversight. If you have chosen that someone is a contractor, then you are probably not monitoring them and overseeing the program. And that's going to have a direct impact on our program objectives of achieving the goals that we wanted to. And that's where it is. Because the funds are for a public service, we want to deliver our objectives. We want to make sure that those STEM learners are getting the best we have. By having a subrecipient, you can monitor and have oversight and ensure that the objectives of the program are being achieved.
That's awesome. So that brings me back to subrecipient monitoring. So I want to talk a little bit more about it. I think it's a critical topic. I think it's very important for everyone out there to understand what subrecipient monitoring is and how it is helpful with your programs and beneficial. So one of the reasons organizations do not want to deal with subrecipients, as we said, is due to that strict regulation that comes with subrecipient oversight and monitoring. And the fact that these subs need to understand and follow the same federal compliance and the same terms and conditions as the recipient. That's a lot. It is the recipient's responsibility to ensure that compliance is followed. And even that goes into starts at the pre-award stage. So from the pre-award stage all the way through the closeout of the award, it is the recipient or pass-through agency's responsibility to make sure compliance is followed by the subrecipient. So contractors have to be monitored to a point, right? Just not as extensively. It's not a programmatic review. It's a review of, are you doing your job? Have you supplied the services and the goods that we need? And that's about all you need for them. But that's not the case with subrecipients. So some organizations just do not have the capacity. They do not have the skills. They do not have the people that understand grants or even the procurement side to do what's needed to follow all the compliance necessary when they actually have subrecipients. But as Paula stated, there are possible consequences if you don't tackle this task head on from the beginning. If you don't properly say you should be a subrecipient, you should have a subrecipient or a contractor, and you choose the wrong one. So for some grants, like active learners, like we've been talking about, you need subrecipients to meet the grant objectives. That's all there is to it. So how do you plan for it and do it effectively? So I'm going to give you some actions you can take that can help you plan for subrecipients and do this effectively. So I have 10 points here, and I'll try to get through them fairly quick so they don't linger too long. But prioritize based on your risk. So if you have a low on staff or understanding of how this works, start with your risk assessment, identify subrecipients that pose your highest risk, and focus on the monitoring efforts. Focus your monitoring efforts on these high-risk subrecipients. Leverage your technology. If you have grants management software tools, they are fantastic in helping with subrecipient monitoring. So leverage what you have, whether it's your grant system in your ERP, whether it's grants management system, leverage that. And if you don't have either of those, you may, and especially if you have a lot of subrecipients, you may want to look in what kind of data automation can help you in this. Standardize your processes, your checklists, your templates, your procedures, and this can really streamline your process and make it easier for your staff to conduct these monitoring activities and conduct them efficiently. Do remote monitoring. We know there's certain instances with subrecipients that you have to do an on-site visit, but do as much remote monitoring as you can. Virtual meetings, digital document reviews, and reduce the need for on-site visits, and allow for more frequent communication and oversight by doing it remotely. Focus on key indicators. So monitor your key performance indicators that are really critical to the success of your subaward. You may have some that are more important than others. Focus on the ones that are more important. This will allow you to use your resources by focusing on those most important subrecipient performance aspects. Training and capacity building. And this is the one thing Paula and I harp on all the time. If you go out there and train your subrecipients beforehand and you help them understand the workflows and how those workflows can work for them, it'll be a much more efficient process and it'll reduce the need for intensive oversight. Do periodic reporting. So you can set up a quarterly reporting where they report to you. So you can identify issues as quick as you can that might require some kind of follow-up. Always communication and collaboration. That goes with your training and capacity. Make sure you have an open door policy with them to call you and discuss any kind of issues that might arise. And hopefully this will help reduce that need for intensive oversight. Here's a big one. Utilize external resources. If your budget allows, consider hiring a temporary staff if necessary, permanent staff, consultants, external auditors, anyone who can assist you with those monitoring tasks, especially in peak periods when your resources might be constrained. Those type of folks can come in and help you through that time period. And especially like with consultants, you have professionals who know how to do subrecipient monitoring and keep you compliance. Again, number one thing, you need to stay compliant, and those subrecipients need to stay compliant as well. And the last thing is just focus on your high impact areas and concentrate your efforts where your monitoring will be the greatest impact. A lot of times that's financial management because you're looking at compliance, key regulations, and also you want to make sure you're achieving your program outcomes. So focus on areas like that are more important to the grant and focus of the grant. So those are my ideas and my suggestions. Yeah.
And I think that's a long list, but it's a really thorough list because that is the approach. Anyone starting new in particular could take some incredible notes from those 10 bullet points you just made and really design a program from the beginning that's going to be successful. All right, so I'm going to wrap it up. If there's anything to remember from today's podcast, let it be this. Making the choice between a subrecipient and a contractor is critical. Understand the nature of the relationship before deciding, and hint, hint, think about it when you're writing the grant from the beginning. Number 2, the consequences for making the wrong decision can have dramatic repercussions for your organization. That risk is not worth taking. So really be thoughtful in that determination that you're making. And absolutely, number 3, monitoring is essential. You have programmatic monitoring, you have fiscal monitoring, and then you have compliance monitoring with regulations and terms and conditions of the award. It's not a place where you can lose your focus. And I think that's a pretty good summary.
That's a great summary. And just to wrap that up, we love our subrecipients and we are such grant nerds. And we love all the work that comes with it. And we love the compliance that comes with it. And we hope that everyone listening to this podcast also loves their subrecipients. And I hope this is helpful for you when trying to figure out which subrecipient, whether you choose a subrecipient or a contractor when you're passing through your funding and the understanding of what goes along with each of those. So if you have any questions on subrecipients, you can reach us I'm at kat.kizior@cbh.com. Paula is at paula.heller, HELLER, @cbh.com.
Thank you to our audience for listening in today. And remember to subscribe to the series at www.cbh.com/cherry-Bekaert-podcast/. Have a great day, everyone.
This was Christian again. I hope you enjoyed this episode and look forward to our next one. Don't forget to subscribe.